Hi, my name is Mike Schuster.
And I'm Gary Mason. And this is Aftermath of Murder,
the series. Welcome to the podcast. Just to give a little recap of our story thus far.
Ted Price was killed in the Arizona desert by 4 gunshot wounds in 2002.
Aaron Gunchus and a woman named Jennifer committed the crime. Gunchus has been on death row for over 10 years, and it's now November of 2022. But he has finally petitioned the Attorney General to file a warrant for his execution.
And the Attorney General has granted his request. He is now waiting for the warrant of execution to be issued.
There are now over 100 prisoners on death row in Arizona. The state suspended capital punishment in 2014 after the controversial execution of Joseph Wood, which lasted almost 2 hours and required 15 injections. And I have my thoughts about the controversy about lethal injection and why it does or doesn't work.
Well, Dr. Mike, I would say that you would be the perfect person to comment.
Well, not that I've pushed the drugs, although I have pushed some of these drugs, but not in a lethal manner. So here's my thought about that the drugs really work. They really work. But the problem is that they have a lot of trouble getting the veins, especially in these prisoners who have poor veins because of drug abuse and age. And the problem with getting the line in is sometimes very difficult to find a vein, and sometimes they can even find the vein, but they go through the vein. It's called blowing the vein, where you're injecting it, but it's no longer going through the vein into the circulation. It's just going under the skin and really not causing the effects they want to.
Well, some people might say if they didn't allow these prisoners to sit on death row for decades, then maybe when they were younger, they could find a vein better.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that I think is the majority of the reason why these are botched executions. But that's just my opinion as a physician.
And it's a good opinion.
Okay.
Right. So executions were suspended, but the suspension was lifted a few years ago. Rumors of problems with some of these recent executions make Gunchus rethink things.
Yeah. So in January of 2023, Gunchus actually seems to change his mind and wants to withdraw his warrant of execution.
It turns out that Gunchus has actually requested a warrant of execution a number of times over the years. But now the outgoing Attorney General calls his bluff and actually requests it. So when his bluff gets called, he backs off. And suddenly he doesn't want to be executed anymore. So I think he maybe does this just for publicity. Anyways, he basically predicates his arguments on what he thinks will be a torturous experience and amounts to cruel and unusual punishment, not unlike dragging somebody out to the desert and shooting them 4 times.
That's a phrase that's taken from the U.S. Constitution, of course, but not always applied to this instance, especially from the convict side of things.
Right. But I will say this. At this point, the state recently had begun executing convicts again. So even as recently as November of 2022, which is when Gunchus requested his warrant of execution be issued. And apparently those were carried out as planned.
As mentioned, politics had recently changed in Arizona, and the new Attorney General asked for the warrant request to be withdrawn.
So here we get into a legal gray area once the Attorney General asked to withdraw the warrant. So now attorneys have to bring this to the state Supreme Court and ask them to rule on it.
And here's the victim rights attorney, Colleen Clace, again.
Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays filed a motion to withdraw that warrant. From that point on, there was months worth of litigation. The Arizona Supreme Court questioned whether they could do anything other than issue the warrant. And ultimately, the Arizona Supreme Court ruled that it had no choice but to issue that warrant.
The Supreme Court of Arizona decides that it has no choice other than to issue the warrant, which it does at the beginning of March of 23. 35-day clock of execution is running, and the deadline for the execution is April 6th.
Right. But Katie Hobbs, the new governor, refuses to follow it. And here's Colleen Clace to talk about that.
However, once that warrant was issued, Arizona's new governor, Katie Hobbs, refused to follow it. She took a position that the court could issue a warrant, but it didn't mean that she had to follow through with it. After Governor Hobbs refused to follow the warrant, my office asked the Supreme Court to order Governor Hobbs to follow Arizona law, to do her job and follow the warrant. While all of this was going on, Governor Hobbs appointed an independent person to review Arizona's death penalty process. And this comes on the heels of 3 successful and constitutional executions that happened in Arizona in 2022.
Colleen Clace is saying it in a very civilized way, but basically, Colleen, acting on behalf of Ted's family, sues the state of Arizona to execute Gunches. Here's Brittany to talk about it.
I was fucking livid because when Karen sent me that text that they approved it and it was done, I was at work when I got that text message and I had tears of relief and I felt all this weight just lifted. And for them to take less than 24 hours, barely 24 hours, to make a public statement with no standing in anybody's eyes, because the most recent execution was in November. How much could have changed in November? And you have people that were at that last one saying everything went the way it was supposed to. So I feel like it was more of her not believing in the death penalty.
So Ted's family's ire becomes very laser focused on Arizona's newly elected governor, Katie Hobbs. Here's Brittany talking about it again.
I would honestly just say, do what the state represents for victims' rights. You are a governor of a state who has the death penalty as a punishment.
Basically, Ted's family is challenging whether or not the governor has the right to refuse to execute someone, even after the warrant of execution was issued.
Brittany makes a compelling argument. He's received a sentence of death penalty twice now from a jury, and the family's asking for it, and he himself has actually asked for it.
Right. Governor Hobbs appoints an independent person to review Arizona's death penalty process, and she unilaterally halts executions in the state, claiming that the state is not really prepared to perform these executions.
Even though they just did them a few months earlier.
Right.
And ultimately, the Arizona Supreme Court rules that the question of law must be decided in the Superior Court.
Right. And the Superior Court states further review is moot because there isn't time to argue before the warrant expires in the beginning of April in 2023.
Yeah, the clock had been ticking. So the family requests for the Supreme Court to extend the warrant of execution, and it's denied. And the warrant expires April 6, 2023.
Here's Ted's sister.
I didn't think she was going to get away with it. The whole time leading up to that date, I kept thinking somebody's going to say, you can't do that. You can't undo what you think you can undo. And it shocked me that she got away with it. I didn't think she was going to get away with it. I mean, as the time was getting closer and closer, I started thinking, holy crap, she's going to get away with this.
So the court issues its ruling, Gunches remains on death row, and the family is further frustrated, even now, 20 plus years later.
So what has happened to the other people involved in this story?
Well, let's see. We've got a number of people. So we've got Gunches, of course, and he is sitting on death row, and apparently he doesn't like it, which could be good, I suppose.
And he's no longer in solitary confinement.
So basically, the state of Arizona has changed the way they do death row. Initially, when Gunches was first put on death row, he was in solitary confinement, 23 hours a day. You get 1 hour of alone exercise time, no television, no library, all of that. Now they've decided that that is cruel and unusual, and I don't necessarily disagree. I think you'd go nuts spending 20 years in one little room all by yourself.
Makes you start to think maybe you didn't do the murder. Guess if you've been in solitary that long for 20 years, you'd start to think maybe you really didn't even do it. Ha ha.
Right, ha ha. But now, so what they've done is they've taken death row, and rather than put these guys in general population, they make a death row general population. So everyone in death row, now they have a day room, they get a TV, they've got library, they
right.
can get a job in the prison doing that.
And it turns out that people like his sister, Karen, can get online and see what privileges he has. Is that correct?
That is correct. And it apparently frustrates Ted's family to learn that these things have been loosened up slightly.
That he's enjoying life a little bit.
I'm not sure I would say he's enjoying life more than he was in solitary confinement, at least, right? And so then who else do we have? We have Jennifer, right? And Jennifer was convicted, and she spent her 17 years. And we spoke to her, and she did not agree to be on the podcast. But basically what we found is that, she went into prison as a 17-year-old. During her prison time, she managed to get 2 associate's degrees, so she got education, and she did her time. She had good time. She got released, and she
had a good time?
She had some good time.
What does that mean?
Well, that means that she was behaved.
Okay.
She had good behavior.
Yeah, it sounds like you said she had a good time.
No. We have Kat, who...
And she seems to have put it behind her a little bit.
Jennifer has.
Yeah.
Yes, based on our conversation.
Yeah.
Right. And then we have Kat, who seemed to evade justice in some ways, or,
Yeah, you can't help. We're not trying to pin anything on Kat, but it's clear that she escaped being indicted on this.
Right.
But anyway, she's moved.
It seems to the casual observer that she was more involved than she was ever held accountable for. Right. But she's moved. She's in a different state now. And
do we know anything about her 2 children? She has more than 2 children, but the 2 that were living there. Right.
The only thing I know is that her son Wesley is with her in her new location, which we won't give you. But, and apparently he's a marijuana farmer.
Oh,
yeah.
How appropriate.
We weren't able to find Maria, so we have no idea what's going on with her, but I assume she's still in contact with her mother, Kat. We have Michelle, who I did find on Facebook, but she wouldn't respond to me. So she doesn't put very many posts up there. I don't really know what's going on, but it seems that she's still in Arizona, right? We've got Ted's mom, who is living in Utah and doing pretty well. She's a very stoic individual, and if anyone in all of this has achieved closure, I would say it's her.
Good.
Right. We've got both of Ted's children, Brittany and Justin. So Brittany we've talked to, and she's been on the podcast here. Justin did not want to participate, and apparently he's had some struggles because of his dad's murder, which is understandable. We've got his sister, Karen, who we talked to on this podcast, and she seems to be doing pretty well, but she's the family
matriarch.
Well, no, but she's the one that tracks all this and lets the family know what's going on, right? We've got Ted's sister, Sheila, who is still very affected by this. When you talk to her, I've talked to her, and when you bring it up, she gets very emotional very quickly. So that's why we don't have Sheila on the podcast. And then Ted's other sister, Joni, who passed away a number of years ago. So we didn't get a chance to talk to her.
We really haven't talked to Gunches's family, so we don't know how they are doing.
We did try to reach out to his family, but they were unresponsive. And then I think the last person also we haven't spoken to is Ted's ex-wife, Tara. And we were in contact with her, but she refused to participate. She also gets pretty emotional when we talk about Ted.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
But we don't want to lose sight of the fact that this is all about Ted Price. His life has rippled effects on people, and his death has created ripple effects of their own.
Right. I wanted to be sure that we mention how he is remembered by those who loved him.
We mentioned in episode 1 that Ted had a tattoo of a Black Panther and a snake on his back. Here's his daughter Brittany talking about it, and her brother Justin.
But when I got my memorial tattoo, Justin wanted one, and he was like, I really want to have the same one Dad had. And I was like, fair enough. I was like, I get it. So I took him. I took him to get his first tattoo, and for his first tattoo, he sat there for an hour and a half. And he got it in the same place.
And today, Brittany is a paralegal. She says she got into the legal profession because of her father's death, and it's kind of become a calling for her. When we initially began this project, we were going to focus on the concept of closure and see if anyone involved got any degree of that by however they define that word.
It's a tricky concept. Most people will tell you that they never get closure, but they might get close to it.
And here's Ted's sister Karen talking about it.
That it doesn't make sense, that there's no such thing. So Ted's going to be dead forever. Like, Gunch's being convicted for the death penalty doesn't bring Ted back. Gunch's being executed doesn't technically bring Ted back. But for me, I feel like the thought that I don't ever have to think about Gunch's again, that I don't have to look up his prison record to see what kind of a job he has or whether or not he's gotten in trouble, that for me, that puts a pin in it.
We asked the same question of his daughter, Brittany.
Okay, so we use the word closure after you experience a traumatic event like this. How would you define the concept of closure?
It's hard. Closure for me would just, I mean, especially for us, because we've been dealing with the Arizona legal system for the last 21 years, it would stop being a constant reminder, not having to wait or having something get brought up. Hey, this is happening. Hey, this is happening. It would just officially, legally be done and over and we won't have to have it brought up again.
Right.
But now I feel like cat's always going to bother me, and that will be something that I will never get closure on.
Here it is, roughly 21 years later, and there are still ripple effects from this murder.
It would be nice to conclude the story with a nice bow on it. But as of the recording of this episode, Gunch's remains on death row, and the governor of Arizona is not moving forward with his execution. A year later, and the independent review is still not completed. And even if it were, there's no guarantee Gunch's would be the first up on the execution list.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this project and podcast.
Thank you so much for joining us.
And we really look forward to having you join us in the next season for another edition of
Aftermath of Murder,
the series.
I'm Gary Mason.
I'm Mike Schuster,
This has been Aftermath of Murder,
the series.
Thank you for joining us on Season 1. We appreciate each and every one of you. Please join us next season on Aftermath of Murder.
The series.
Be sure to check out our webpage at aftermathofmurderseries.com for more information, access to special content, merchandise, and more.
Our writer is Darren Coyle. This has been a Closure AOM production in association with KM Voice.